Okay, on that note, I think we're going to get rolling along because we have just way too many wonderful people in this room to wait much longer. So I want to introduce myself. I'm Mary Lloyd, and I'm an Impact 100 member. I am also the education chair. And so we've been in the process over the last couple of years of offering some ongoing learning and education for our members. So today we're going to delve into a little bit of personal giving and impact investment. We're going to go down the money trail before tax season. I want to just thank, we've got just such a wonderful panel of people today who are joining us. Each one of them in their own right could talk to us for a whole afternoon for sure. But I think together they just make this really dynamic, cohesive group, and we'll cover a number of topics. Before we get rolling, I just want to tell you quickly, if you're not a member of Impact 100, we're a collective giving organization comprised of at least 100 women. We are up to, I think, 129 this year. Our goal is 150. But each of us that are members typically donate $1,000. We generate $100,000 and accept grant proposals from small nonprofits in the Puget Sound region. We're right in the process right now of reviewing 49. We had 49 applicants this year. And so we're reviewing those, and then we pare that down to, I think it's usually the top 3 or 4. And in June, early June, everyone, all the members come together and we all get to vote on the organization that gets the $100,000 grant, as well as if there is extra money. In the past, we've given out a couple of smaller grants to our runners-up as well. We are trust-based in our philanthropy and in our philosophy. And a vision I think we have that I really subscribe to is a world where nonprofits spend time transforming communities, not fundraising. Like, it would just be so nice if we could finally get there. Today, I want to introduce Michelle Matthew. She's with us today. We're so lucky. She runs a woman-founded, majority woman-owned capital firm. And she's the CEO of Fulcrum. I couldn't be more excited. She's a graduate of Whitman, doing some incredible things. We also have today with us Teresa Thomas Mason-Gale. And Teresa describes herself as a matchmaker. And I just love that about her because she really does bring philanthropic, corporate, and financial networks together in really innovative and entrepreneurial ways. We also have Cameron Barsness, and she is a CFP, Certified Financial Planner, as well as a coach, and really is on the ground level right now working around ESGs and some of our social impact issues around being value-based, being beneficial to either the globe or to social constructs or to the goodness of the world. So, and this area is just blowing up. So I think it's something that we all have a little bit to learn about. And then our moderator today is Jennifer Easley, who is also, she's a 3-year member of Impact 100, and she's a financial planner herself, works with individuals on wealth management and financial planning. And what I love about all these gals is they come with experience in nonprofits. They've all had some time with philanthropy. They've been on boards of directors. They're currently standing on boards of directors. They put women in sort of the center of this world, which we will hear a little bit today is still fairly male-centric and aging, thankfully. So it is a space that they've really carved out a room for themselves, and I think are doing some amazing things. They're catalysts, they're entrepreneurs, they're influencers, and I'm just going to be quiet at that point and let you hear from them because they do it so much better. But thanks for coming. We've got an agenda that we're going to sort of follow. I think that might be our next slide. There we go. So we will, please, the chat room is open. If you have a question and want to type it in, super. We'll also have our eyes peeled. So if someone does want to raise their hand, If something is just burning and you've got to get it out, each of our members is going to talk a little bit, and then we will have some time at the end, probably more than we have on our for questions and answers, because we really do think this is going to be quite a conversation that we have together. So thanks for coming and enjoy. Jennifer, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Mary, what a great introduction. I'm glad you did introductions because that passion behind your words was fantastic. Thank you everybody for joining us. We are very excited to be part of this education session, and I'm glad that we're doing education beyond all the hard work and heavy lifting of that impact does. And so really what I'm going to do is just kind of kick it off to each of our speakers, but our goal is pretty simple. We really want to empower you. And I think empowerment comes from education and it comes from hearing perspectives. And this is really just an interesting world to try to marry your definition of the greater good, which is really what we're doing with Impact 100, but combine that with your money. And sometimes people think those are separate, and we're going to kind of demystify that. And certainly, again, try to give you the power to do that for you and however you individually define that. But we're also, one of the things we talked about with Mary is this is not going to be encapsulate everything in an hour and give you all the answers. We're going to raise questions too. And so we look forward to your questions, and we look forward to any kind of follow-up questions that you might have along the way too. So with that, I'm going to kick it to Teresa, who's going to kind of lay some groundwork for our discussion.
Hi, everyone. It's really an honor to be here with Impact 100 and all of your beautiful faces. Always excited to talk about social impact and how really, amazing folks can come together collectively, and the way that that leads to synergy that, greater than the sum of our parts, right? So one thing I usually do at the beginning of a talk is say that I'm a stutterer, so that way I hopefully won't stutter, because I won't be worried you're going to discover my flaw. Like, you can spend time finding out my other flaws later, but I think one of the things that I really wanted to kick off this time, so I'm honored to, especially to go first and kind of frame things out, is to share what I think folks, many times when I talk about this, is a startling discussion that really the power of women in the financial ecosystem today. There's great discussion about the details of what portion of the total amount of private wealth is controlled by women. But estimates range at, thank you, Anna, estimates range as high as 2/3 of private capital in the United States is now controlled by women in some form or another. So that's pretty shocking and exciting, and a leverage point that I think really frames out what Impact 100 is doing, as I understand it, and what we're here to talk about today. How do we individually and collectively take that position socially, financially, politically, in our lives, and in how we drive markets with our capital? How do we take that position and really deeply consider how far we can push forward women, community, and all people towards greater equity, greater sustainability, like plain old sustainability of our planet, and all the things that we care about, so that the maximum number of humans and sentient beings and non-sentient beings can live lives of value and dignity on their own terms. So that's why that's really what I feel like we're here today to do. That's the kind of vibe I'm trying to bring to what I do every day. And so Mary, you mentioned that the private wealth marketplace, right? The folks that are doing that work are starting to change. We have some truly groundbreaking leaders here today, and but a lot more change is going to be coming to that sector. Like, I just had a look at some statistics preparing for today's session. And what I'm seeing is that women account for 15 to 20% of financial advisors. Women-owned, women-led, women-founded firms. I'll let Michelle speak to that, but it's a pretty low number. But when we look at gender as an issue, which I know other panelists will speak to today, when we just isolate gender as a topic to focus in on in terms of investments, it's pretty startling there. And so I won't, obviously that's not my expertise area, but all of that comes together to lay a context for this conversation and conversations like this to really, really like deeply grapple with how significant our opportunity is right now to move markets. And if we all collectively, as women in the United States through wealth, decided there would be no more plastic bags, there would be no more plastic bags. If we decided that childcare was the issue that we wanted to double down on, childcare would be solved for everyone. And so I just want to talk about like what my expertise is, and people like me, and I'm speaking for like all the folks in a way, who I'm a chartered advisor in philanthropy, which is a sort of unique training on how to work closely with not only donors like yourselves, but financial managers and the financial sector, which in this case, I'm counting foundations and philanthropic tools as a part of that. So there are around 2,600 CAPs. There's plenty here in the Seattle area. But the reason that was important to me to get that designation was, as someone with many years experience in the nonprofit sector and government sector, I knew that there were billions there that could be leveraged for change. And when we look at the trillions that are available to leverage for change in finance, I knew I had to learn more. So one of the things that my experience, folks who are encountering the desire to accelerate change, like everyone in Impact 100 is that we're all very enthusiastic, and I face this every day. For my independent firm, Peacefield, I'm like chief officer of totally getting excited about stuff. And when we enter into the process of being a part of change, a lot of new questions come up. And what are the methodologies, the tools, the legal structures, beyond just a clear donation to a food bank? I'm going to send $100 and I know someone's going to eat today. And that is a crucial part of the portfolio of the way that any individual can give, is that immediate solve a need right now. Many of us are looking, I'm also trained in something called social impact strategy. Many of us are looking to solve systemic issues. And those are the things that collaboration can really help us get to, is addressing a systemic issue. And, if you take the issue of childcare, when you start to give a philanthropic advisor and a collaborative like Impact 100, collectively, you can engage with questions like, how do I make the right change? How do I make the right philanthropic investments? Do I give to childcare providers like Childcare Aware? Do I invest in public policy organizations that are going to change at systems level? How do I express this in my investment portfolio? Like, can I invest in are there startups that are solving the childcare issue? There's a whole world of questions to engage with there. And that's where the power of collaboration really comes in. So how do you do that well? How do you collaborate with the leading childcare foundations? How do you collaborate with existing childcare advocates? It's a whole world to engage in that's fascinating and exciting and brings immense value and satisfaction to one's life. But, there are professionals out there who can help with that journey. Nothing is more valuable, though, than your own enthusiasm and ability to focus together. So it's that collaboration. That's why I'm so excited about Impact 100 as a group and as a movement. Another thing I really wanted to talk about is that the thing that I love about your group and being a part of social impact work is the way in which pulling together all of the expertise from finance, from philanthropy, from communications, from community organizing, from public policy, and those complex collaboratives that are really making change, is that you get the benefit of all that expertise and the passion and the ability to have a network personally to support you, because engaging with some of this stuff can be challenging because you learn things about the world, which can probably are not surprising, but they can be unsettling. So that passion there really can move us forward. And then it allows for the magic to happen. When you have all of those great strengths together, I'm going to give 2 or 3 examples of that have come up. We're hopefully at the end of a pandemic. And for me, one way that bringing together these finance, philanthropy, government, advocacy, nonprofit sector, pulling all that together, that's been expressed for me and given me immense value to my life and my business, was a partnership that I have with the Washington State Department of Commerce. Early in the pandemic, I was asked by them, who I had been helping to raise money philanthropically. This was in the first couple of weeks of the pandemic, and the state of Washington had to purchase PPE for distribution, masks, respirators, and a state can't purchase quickly, right? That's not what you want. There's procurement rules, and those take a long time, and those were way longer than anyone could acquire the PPE. And we were able to establish a donor advised fund, a tool of philanthropy that might be talked about in other sessions today. I don't know. But probably folks are familiar with a DAF. The state was able to establish a DAF and therefore partner with private donors to purchase PPE and immediately deliver it to Washington hospitals and the essential workers. And it was just startling how flexible that tool was as a vehicle for giving and how immediate the change was. That DAF has continued to be instrumental in helping the state of Washington match private donor enthusiasm for change with what the state was investing in. For example, we use that vehicle to help, and this is public knowledge, so there's certainly been press releases about it, to help the Bomber Group give, I think, $1.8 million to match the state's $1.5 million investment in child care capacity planning grants statewide. We did that with, we just actually, I think a check is being cut today for a second round of that. So they really think about, wow, there would have been 20 collaborative capacity planning grants in childcare in the state during the pandemic, when we all learned, wow, childcare is a bigger deal than we thought. Perhaps everyone on this call, on this session probably had an inkling that it was a big deal, but that infrastructure is still undergoing cataclysmic change. So I just wanted to lay out the power of collaboration, the use of the different tools of finance and philanthropy together with other types of expertise, and really the way that the passion of all of our the unique assets and values that we bring to the discussion can really allow for some magic to happen, and new ways to solve problems are emerging every day as a result of all those tools and collaborations. So that's my story so far. I really appreciate the time. Happy to answer questions. Just delighted to be here and to experience this elevated approach to philanthropy in our community.
I'm going to do a follow-up question, Mary. So one of the things when we were talking about preparing for this meeting, we didn't want to make any assumptions about the jargon we tend to kind of throw around in our profession. And so Teresa brings up a really awesome tool called a donor advised fund. But why don't we go ahead and just talk about what that is now, since that was kind of freshly put forward. Michelle or Cam, do you want to kind of describe what a donor advised fund is? And no, yes.
Go ahead, Michelle. I can do it too, but go for it.
Oh, okay, thank you. So a donor advised fund is a charitable giving vehicle where the donor can contribute cash or securities into an account, and that tax deduction on the full market value, usually you consult with your CPA on this, but you can take the deduction up front, and the giving from that can be directed by the donor, hence donor advised, toward causes over time, toward qualified charities over time, either right away or spread out and deferred over time. So it's a very flexible way of giving and has some tax advantages. They're typically easy to set up, they're low cost. The assets in the donor advised fund can be invested according to your preferences. And there are providers through Schwab or Fidelity or other independent firms that can serve as the administrator on these. And so the flexibility happens both in how those assets are managed. You can then align those investments with your values through environmental, social, and governance investment themes, so the assets are working for you, and how those assets are distributed and the impact they have in the community. You can derive the impact you want to see through those gift grants, the grant directions over time. They're fabulous vehicles. They are comparable to foundations and charitable trusts, but much more flexible and accessible for a broad range of people. Charities like them, however, because donor advised funds involve some form of deferred giving, there's a drawback. Many charities want the money today, not 3, 5, 10 years in the future. So that conversation is something you'll have internally with you and your family, and with the charities you seek to reward and support. Feel free to add if I skipped anything there, Cam.
No, you touched on the piece that I really wanted to highlight, was that it's in some ways like a simplified foundation, which is great. You don't have a lot of the administrative costs that go through with a foundation, but you can come together intergenerationally and everybody could potentially give to the same account. You can, direct how those grants go out in a given year or over time. So there's a legacy planning, estate planning component to it as well, where you can say, at my death, I want to leave these successor grantors, children or grandchildren, to get involved, or I want the account to pay out over 10 years to, these different charities. So it has a lot of flexibility in how you use it as a tax planning tool. As a tax nerd, I think they're wonderful when you think about the term that came around in 2018 when the tax code changed, where we have bunched giving, if anybody's heard about that. So they just have wonderful attributes, and they can be community-based as well. We have Seattle Foundation here, and I know San Juan Islands has their own foundation that does somewhat of a DAF. So there's all different ways to use them.
Okay.
And I would love to know if this is, how much do people give in a donor advised fund? I know they're only required to give up to, what is it, 5% in order to qualify? Or do those levels seem to be changing? Does it seem as though people are gifting and granting more, or they're still hanging on and making
I
definitely.
think it
recommend.
depends on the level of assets, Mary. I think one thing that we see a lot with clients is as we have them use a donor advised fund in their 50s and 60s to do kind of bunch gifts, we're having them go ahead and draw that down as they get up to 70 and a half, where we can start using a qualified charitable distribution from an IRA. Now I'm throwing out more terms that don't have definitions, but we'll kind of have them shift that giving away from the donor advised fund, unless it's something that they're funding, for an intergenerational transfer and involving family in it. We might have them shift that over to the IRA side, where you get a different tax advantage there. So I see from our clients, most give more than that 5%, at least anecdotally, I can say that for ours.
And I could speak to that. I'm involved with the Donor Advised Fund Research Collaborative, which is a national partnership with 15 different researchers. And also there's another great group called the Science of Philanthropy Initiative that are really looking at these trends. And it turns out, actually, when you look, at least with the sample size that's been studied, which includes data from the National Philanthropic Trust and Schwab and Vanguard, I think are all lending their data. It turns out that money moves faster through DAFs than it does through other financial or philanthropic vehicles. And it's also a tool that's been used very creatively throughout the impact investing sector for other needs. So there's a lot, but I think for this group, it's a fabulous tool, especially as you're thinking it through your philanthropic strategy. It may be a point in your life when you do want your own foundation. It may be you want to join forces with a foundation that already exists, but in the interim, you get the benefits financially, and you get the ability to learn through your philanthropic journey how to be expert in, making sure your giving goes where you want it, when you want it to.
Okay, fantastic. We did want to make sure we kind of talked about that, and I'm sure you may have more questions, but let me go ahead and we'll save those questions for the end, and I'm going to shift over to Pam, who's going to talk more about this other acronym we've thrown out, ESG and impact investing, and kind of demystify that a bit, and then kind of talk about more how you can utilize them.
Yeah, thank you. I am just honored to be here. I think nothing is better than being in a virtual room with a group of women and getting to see people get excited about ways that their money can work for them. So I'll give a little bit of background on me, and then I'll talk about what that means. So I've been doing financial planning, wealth advising for about 16 years. I own a firm here in Pioneer Square area, Kutcher, Benner, Barsness, and Stevens. And I kind of came to this as a young activist. The first time I remember having a really large opinion was the Lillian Vernon catalog. And if anybody remembers those, everything in it was the boys had red and yellow and blue, and it was sports, and the girl stuff was purple and pink, and it had ballerinas on it. And at probably age 7, this made me really, really mad, because I thought pink and purple should just die. I had zero interest in them. And so I went ahead and I wrote them a letter about how wrong they were in their catalog and how they didn't need to do this. And some girls really liked basketball, and some girls really liked red. And I thought they needed to change their whole catalog, because I was up in arms about it. So I sent that off to them. Shockingly, I didn't hear back as to why they didn't change their product lineup, but my activism around gender diversity and just what I thought was like binary started really early. So I've never been shy about expressing my opinion. And when I was early in my career, I got dubbed the charitable girl in our firm. I was the one that was interested in kind of planning out charitable giving and these soft ideas, so to speak, when it came to investing. And they said, here, you figure this out. So I figured it out. And I absolutely love how it comes together, this idea that some of what we do in investing can be really fun to talk about. And Michelle, I'm not going to knock any of the wonky CFA stuff, but I just can't go there. So I'm going to leave some of the hard investing stuff to you. I'll talk about the big picture of, when we say impact investing or sustainable investing or environmental, social governance, ESG, what the heck do we mean? So I'm going to have, first, let me tell you the why. So I was teaching to a group of students at Santa Clara and in their sustainable investment class. And they basically had all decided that like capitalism was bad and they were out. I was like, okay, let's talk about that, because kind of is a hard concept, right? Like you want to make money, but you don't like capitalism. It's all bad. And I said, who listens to Hamilton? And they were all like, I listen to Hamilton. I'm like, okay, what do they sing about, right? There's a whole song about being in the room where it happens. And they were like, yeah. I'm like, okay, so if I don't play the game, if I don't invest my money, if I don't buy a share, I have no say. I don't get to be in any room. So if I want to affect change in the public markets, where you guys are telling me as 18-year-old students that no change can happen, you're right. I don't even get to play if I can't buy. But if I buy a share or I buy a mutual fund, who cares about this type of stuff? My voice gets to be in that room. I get a vote on shareholder proposals. I get to, go in and talk to management, because let's be honest, the real change happens behind the scenes, and it's probably not in the shareholder proposal. It happens way before that even comes to the table, right? So I want to be in the room where it happens. So when we talk about investing, how do we get in the room where it happens? So let's talk about what that even means. So Anna, if you'll pull up I call it the wheel. If you'll pull up the wheel slide, that would be really helpful. So this is one of the ways that we think about environmental social governance. And what it is to say within each of these E, S, and G, what are the bigger pieces that we're talking about? And you're not going to be able to see the little white letters on this. So look at the slide that was sent to you and blow it up where you can actually see it. But what happens is in each of those kind of sectors, we kind of think about what falls in that. What's an environmental risk? Now, here I can define two different ways, and you'll hear this said all different ways. You can invest your values, which is one way of putting it. But I find as an advisor, who not all my clients want to do this, if I sit down at the table and I say, do you want to invest your values? Not one person sitting across that table from me is going to shake their head and go, no, I don't want to do that. Like they're not going to say that out loud, right? So I actually refrain from kind of saying that word. And I think about it in when we're looking at an investment, what type of risk are we worried about in this type of investment? So is it an environmental risk? Does it have to do with pollution or sustainable agriculture or climate change or water rights and preservation? If it's social, what's going on in the workplace? What's going on with benefits? What's going on with community development and human rights? If it's corporate governance, what's on their board? Now we talk about gender diversity, we talk about LGBTQ, we talk about ethnicity, all these things. What's the diversity? What's your corporate structure? What's your equity and compensation? What's that difference between the very top earner and the day-to-day earner at the bottom? So the way I really think about this when I step back and I say, okay, how does this work in investing, right? First, I want to know it's a good investment. I got to know from the foundation that when I use all those investing acronyms that are all of our eyes glaze over in a meeting and everybody goes, what are you talking about? The alpha and the beta and all of this, all of that's good on this company. But now I'm going to go to the optometrist and I'm going to put on a different lens. So we said, okay, I see through the investment lens, I like this company. But now I look at it and I say from the environmental lens and looking at these different issues, how does this company stack up? I put on the corporate governance lens. Through this lens, how does this company stack up? And where is it that I'm comfortable taking on additional risk? Because if we simply look at the black and white investment side of a balance sheet or a cash flow, we may be totally putting on blinders to what the bigger risk is to investing in one of these companies, right? So now I start putting on these other lenses and I say, what risk am I willing to accept? And really that's going to be a little bit different, right? Because from company to company and sector to sector, the risk is different. So Facebook, I'll pick on two maybe easy ones, and maybe they're a bad example, but Facebook doesn't necessarily have a water rights risk, right? But Pepsi does. If they don't have access to water, they can't make their product. But Facebook, their material risk is in some of the S and the G more than the E. I'm ignoring like energy costs of data farms, but just stick with me as I try to go down this path. Versus some of these other companies, you may say their biggest risk to their business is some of these social and corporate governance issues that really could make their share price go down. And really, we just think that as good actors in the world, we want them to focus on these pieces. So then if you have these different E, S, and G, and you say, well, how do I actually express that in my portfolio? So if you go to the next slide, what I think about is that this is kind of a sliding scale, right? We can say over on, well, yeah, my left, your left, we can just apply exclusions. And some would say maybe this is the older way of thinking about it, going back to South Africa and apartheid, where we just said we're going to exclude very specific things. And we still do this today. Oftentimes we say, we don't want either tobacco or weapons in our portfolio, and that's a very well-known exclusion that comes through. But if you slide across and you try to play that out across all these investments, you may have more of a risk on market return. The goal, in my mind, now whether this happens all the time, my belief, and as we do our due diligence on a fund or on a position that we want to hold in our portfolio, is that market return is going to be the same. We have zero belief that because you invest with ESG, that you're going to get a worse off return. If you narrow down that universe so tiny, then yes. But the goal of environmental social governance is to continue to get market or better returns by applying some of these issue-based risk metrics to better select portfolios that over the long term are going to outperform the market, right? So I can look at this and I can say, where do I want to slide my scale? I want to kind of limit risk, and I'm willing to accept some nuance in this. And I think that that's really important, is that when we get into the all or nothing, good or bad, rarely do we win. It's when we stay in the middle. And maybe that's why this sheet is purple instead of, polar colored now that I'm thinking about it. But we win as we make compromise, because sometimes you will see, say, a mutual fund go in and take a holding in a company that maybe isn't excelling at one of these E, S, or G pieces, but they can now get in the room with the board and say, hey, we see that you're struggling with this, or we see that you have the one token woman on your board. How can we talk about changing that? And then they sit down with management, and through that ownership, they can move it. Now, I would argue that's impactful, right? But was that necessarily like a front PR piece that we're going to see that as an impact investment? Probably not. So you can slide all the way to the right-hand side, and you can think about, if I truly want to make an impact, and in my mind, I think of this a little bit more of like private investment, where I may be willing, maybe not always, but I may be willing to give up a little bit of return, because I know I want to directly give my dollars to some issue or private initiative that's going to purposely affect change. That is 100% the direction of that impact gift. And if I get a small percentage return on that, that's great. If they can just use my money to make a better world, and then ultimately I get that back because they've used it and affected change, that's great too. But I think what I'm trying to say is that there's this sliding scale that goes across all of it. And we get into this place, you can go ahead and take down the slides now. We get into this place where we feel like we have to do all or nothing, that if we don't have an ESG or sustainable portfolio across the board, we're not doing it. I don't think that's true. I think that we can step into this, and over time we can continue to have conversation about what it means, because there's sometimes some hesitancy. There's some deep-rooted myths in investing around this style of investing, because it did used to be more restrictive than it is today. Now we think of who are the best players in this area, who's working the hardest to affect change. And it's just, it's phenomenal to see the impact reports that are coming out of these public market companies, where they're seeing from their eyes, actually, this has a pretty good return on investment when we do some of these things. Turns out when we treat our employees well, and when we work with the community to make it better, a rising tide lifts all boats, right? Like, here we go. So what I love about this is, normally when I get into the room with people and we get to talk about investments, most of the time, one or two people in the room kind of gloss over and they're like, wow, that was, I can't talk about that. That's not dinner conversation. But what I love about sustainable investing is, like, it can be dinner conversation, because we can decide, is so-and-so company an ESG company? Well, why do you think so? What do they do that's good? Why would you invest in them? What is this change that we can affect? And so it becomes something that is actually conversant, and you get the joy of saying, with my money, I made some choices. I got to come to the table and say, yeah, I want to make money off things that are bettering the world, bettering the earth, bettering whatever that issue is that you like. And you get to make money doing the things you like. Like, what's better than that, right? So that's why I love this conversation. I love talking with people about it. I actually work with a lot of advisors around the US, helping them bring it into their practice, because I think the more people that do this, the better. I don't see it as a competitive piece.
Wow. I'm just glad I'm in the room where this conversation is happening. And I really wanted to kind of allow for Q&A, but if you guys don't mind, just sort of one more pause so that Michelle can kind of jump in with a perspective as well. And then hopefully we leave a lot of great time for Q&A. But Mary, is there anything you're kind of seeing in chat that you feel like we should jump on right now?
No, I'm generating a few good questions, but I think we can keep rolling. Yeah.
I will pass the baton to Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I love that I get to follow Cam, because you did such a great job to discuss reframing ESG in the context of what risk we're willing to accept, and the way you positioned it as not being compensatory. We don't have to give up return in order to take that risk. We can do well and make some money at the same time. It's like a double bottom line. And I want to take it one step further and have us all here think today about the triple bottom line, because we can do well. We can invest in things that have that sing to us, that have those positive values in society. And we can do that a third way, do a third thing, and that is invest in people, hire advisors that also reflect those values. All right. Do you see that? It's a triple bottom line. So that means in hiring advisors like Peacefield, like KBBS, like Fulcrum, that reflect your values and the why. Cam started with why. So let's back up a bit here and start with why we are all here today with Impact 100 Seattle. And this vision that we share, that our full stop why, is to address the root causes of the social issues and the disparities that affect people in the Puget Sound region. That's the purpose for Impact 100. We envision a world where everyone, especially underrepresented communities, experience belonging and worth. That's our why. The why for Fulcrum Capital, our why I joined, is to enrich the quality of life for our people, for our clients, and our community. That's our goal. And to get the results that we seek, we need to take risk. And I want to talk a little bit about risk. And there's one thing I want you to take away today, and that is that women are risk takers, and we are a force for change. Change requires taking risk. And now is the time for us as women. We're leading this charge. Globally, there's a shift in the balance of power between men and women toward more equality, more equity, and especially women of color. Women, we are confident, we're competent. The world right now, more than, I'm getting fired up because we are ready to lead. We live in a country where women are starting businesses at 5 times the rate of men. 39% of businesses are majority owned by women. Unfortunately, in our industry, it's less than 10%. I believe, so that the statistics are a little uncertain, but very, very few. In 2018, though, women accounted for nearly half of all students in law, business, and medical doctor programs, up from less than 10% in the 60s. So we are rising, but we are still underrepresented in the boardroom and in corporations. Only 2% of venture funding in this country goes to women-owned, women-founded firms. And in Washington state, it's even worse. You'd be surprised to hear only 1% of venture funding goes to women-founded firms here in Washington. We represent only 14% of CEOs. For such a progressive state, we still have a long way to go. And we in this room are a force for change. We can impact that. We can catalyze. Money is power. And that's why we're here today, making investment decisions like through donor advised funds, like through ESG investing, and engaging advisors with women in leadership positions. That benefits society. It benefits the goals we seek. Companies with women in leadership positions have higher return on investment, higher stock prices, less fraud, higher employee retention, higher employee satisfaction, greater innovation, and improved decision-making. And women are more inclusive of diverse perspectives. Let's see, I'm looking at my notes here for some statistics. 43% of millennials currently identify as Asian, Black, or Hispanic, 43%. So diversity is the theme, I think, for the next decade. If the past 20 years was marked by the rising voice of women, the next will be seen with the rising voice of people of color, and diversity is important to the success. Generation Z, that's the ages 10 to 26 years old. That generation is projected to become majority non-white by 2026. Generation Z will be majority non-white by 2026. So we as women and we as a diverse voice empowering those underrepresented communities, that's our why. And to get there, we need to take risk. So I want to give you guys an exercise. Put your hands together and take a look at your ring finger versus your pointer finger. And how many of you have a ring finger that is longer than your pointer finger? I see a few out there. Yeah, okay. It's interesting because this is pretty astonishing. When I first heard this, I read this, I was flummoxed. I was blown away. If your ring fingers are longer than your pointer fingers, this is very strange. The longer ring finger is correlated with traits such as spatial ability, risk-taking, and assertiveness. It's connected to success in competitive sports and in high-frequency trading and investing. And so longer ring fingers mean more competitiveness. And there's actually a very good reason for this, because those of us with longer ring fingers absorbed more testosterone in the womb, and that makes us more sensitive to that hormone for the rest of our lives. And mine is a little bit longer too. So usually men have longer ring fingers and women have longer index fingers, but among entrepreneurs, female ring fingers are longer than men's. And a University of Chicago study showed that once you control for prenatal testosterone, there is no difference in risk-taking between men and women. So your finger length tells me more about your risk-taking ability than your gender, and candidly other factors as well. Fight, stamina, and risk-taking. So just because you are a woman, we are women, does not mean we aren't risk takers. Risk is important. It's the most important aspect of the investment decision-making process. You have to take risk to get return, but you have to accurately assess that risk. And we as men and women, we really do measure and assess risk differently. Women are more patient, we seek more information. And there's one trait, I'll summarize this here. I want to leave time for questions. But there is one trait, this is really, really important, that women do not possess that men do. And that is overconfidence. In investing, overconfidence is probably the single biggest reason for underperformance. When you're overconfident, you take too much risk that you don't get paid for. And that mispricing, misassessment of risk leads to underperformance. If you look at the statistics in the industry, everybody says, well, it's hard to beat the market. Well, it's a large reason for that is overconfidence. Overreacting is the cousin of overconfidence, but I think overconfidence is dominant. And women, as we are especially equipped to avoid the pitfalls of overconfidence. So I'm going to leave you with 3 things to do, some action items, not just talk. We're all about action here. One, we talked about the donor advised fund and how flexible that is. So as you engage in strategies like that, or gifting through your IRA or other ways, hire diverse advisors. So that's action 1. 2 is align your investments with your values, as Cam discussed, and work with your advisors for pushing for the change that you want to see in the portfolio that you invested. And here's a 3rd one that you might not have thought of before now, and that is demand diverse voices. If you're attending or speaking at a conference, do so only on the condition that at least 30% of the people on that stage with you are underrepresented communities, either women or people of color. Ask the sponsors to only sponsor events where the presenters are people of color. We got to see it to believe it, and you got to get up on the stage and have the voices represent the communities that we want to see. So vote with your dollars. Yeah, it's exciting. I just so love this group here, and thank you for the opportunity. Any questions for me or the rest of the group?
We do have some, and I wanted, just before we go to that, it was something putting this together that we've all acknowledged, and I want to put it out there. You know, finances and financing and who has money is still very indicative of our light color skin on this call. It really very much is. And Impact 100 is working to be diverse and really partner with BIPOC and diverse communities. And, you know, but we need to talk about these things, and we need to be honest about where power resides, and us as women coming together to be allies and to make sure that these issues are discussed is just extremely important. So thank you, Michelle, for including that in your list. I had a couple of questions. I think I'm going to turn them to Cam, but one person asked, how many of your investors do you see are opting for an impact sort of model? And there's one kind of after that too, which is, are you seeing people sort of pool investments together in order to shift some of those needles, whether it's the E or the S or the G?
Yeah, I'll start with the first one, and I'll maybe let Michelle work on it too. But I think the reason I wanted to answer that question is part of it comes down to who's asking the question, right? So previous to 10 years ago, we didn't ask questions about it. We had a few clients who were brave enough to say, hey, I have this really odd idea. I'd really like to invest. It was called socially responsible investing. It probably still can be today, but they said that. So we had a very limited number. And it came down to us saying, like, this is a big world. And I finally just made up this questionnaire that said, what do you care about? Because I wanted to know for these 5 or so clients what they cared about, because that changed what we researched. So previous to us asking the question, we had like 2% of people. Well, then we started asking the question every year when we sent out our questionnaire to clients and, you know, said, what's changed in your financial life? We sent them this ESG questionnaire and said, do you care about any of these things? And lo and behold, a lot of them cared about it. So we went from like 2% to saying that probably 50 or 60% of our clients invest in ESG by their choice. And then we say 100% of our clients invest in it because of our choice, because of our due diligence on some of our asset classes. We've decided that the best funds or the best ownership in some of those classes happen to be funds that have an ESG label on them. But if you start asking the question, so many more people are interested in it. And if you don't ask the question, when we think about generations and we think about, especially for me, and this is stereotypical, but who's interested between a couple in this oftentimes it's a female who can connect with it and go, actually, I really care about that. And so to me, it says that the answer to the question is who's asking it? Because if it's not the advisor asking the client, a far less amount of investors are going to go down this path. The pooled resource one, that comes down, that's tricky. It really comes down to more on the private side. And going back to your comment, Mary, about, you know, looking at who's here and who can go down that path, because there are far more hurdles on what a qualified investor or a accredited investor can kind of pool resources. It limits the pool, and it just makes that initial investment so much higher for anybody. But it's certainly happening. There's a number of places. I work with a private firm that's trying to bring private equity or private investment opportunities to a platform so that advisors around the country can see all the different options, because right now it's really segregated between just who you know and how you know. And then it's hard, it comes down to community foundations and CDFI and things like that. So it's really segregated right now, but there are a lot of push to bring it down to a more centralized location.
Teresa or Michelle, do you want to piggyback on any of that?
Teresa is a whiz at investing to improve lives, and the social impact and catalytic change that direct impact investing can have. And I think what Cameron and I have been talking about is the other side or it's kind of the other end of the spectrum, which is investing in diverse companies, because that also indirectly, it's like a second derivative that improves lives. But in direct impact investing can also benefit from pooling of resources in great ways. And I think those, like Cam mentioned, those have very time sensitive, very specific niche investment opportunities, and there are also private fund vehicles that can help pool the assets together for that direct action impact. And the nice thing about those is the investment can qualify as a mission related investment for private foundations. So there's some leverage that can happen through those commitments in that the expense is also a program investment for those foundations. I think investing, and there was a comment in here that using your DAF to contribute to Impact 100 is a way you can get a twofer in that. Joining the collective with Impact 100 can catalyze even greater change. It's more than the sum of the parts.
Yes, you can use your DAF to join Impact. I love that. Thank you. Go ahead, Teresa.
Just say, like, everyone's already an impact investor. Every investment has an ESG impact. It's whether you're aware and are driving the impact that you have, and all of your decisions on how you deploy your capital has an impact. We're just, as a community and a nation and a planet, coming to grips with how we can better steward the reflective values that are important to us now. And especially as we understand that we are the actors. The power that we're coming to now, we've always had. We're just now figuring out how to use the tools that are available to us to accelerate that, to bring greater leverage to the values we're trying to express. And we're making new tools. And it would be remiss of me not to sort of speak to some of the super radical things that are going on that are exciting. I think when we look, like all of us are probably watching closely the announcements this week with Mackenzie Scott and her husband, and the way that they are using their philanthropic weight, frankly, to change the way we think about our relationships with the folks that we make grants to, and how we engage community. The whole discussion around power that's emerged in the conversation today is a big driver of why Mackenzie Scott's giving is different than others. She's giving and giving power to the organizations she gives to in such a way that they're making the decisions about how it's spent. So the question of power and funding power at the ground and building power in communities that's historically been furthest from opportunity, that is something that philanthropy, and probably in many aspects of our life, that we've been grappling with for a while now. And the pandemic and the related economic impact really brought that out in relief, those differences, right? And the transition of wealth that happened during the pandemic, making those conversations even more to come to the fore. So there are some extremely compelling things that I love, like a group called As You Sow that does some stakeholder advocacy work within the investment sector. And we can talk about them later or at a different time. They're right there on Google. They're great folks. And, there's some radical giving with some folks that I supported with CARES Act dollars, went to racial equity organizations. And we did partnered with Philanthropy Northwest to make that happen. It pushed out about, I think it was $19 million to 400 different racial equity organizations. And the way that was structured, the donors wanted to do, the organizations had to be more than 51% reflective of the communities they served in their staffing, in their board leadership. And then the groups that we recruited, a group of grant reviewers who were 92% reflective of the group. So the decisions were made by the communities that the grants were intended to serve. And that's another way that folks are thinking about this stuff. A different vehicle, DAF vehicle that we did in 2020, 2021, CARES Act dollars for pandemic relief were not available to be distributed to persons who did not have documentation in the US. So you're talking about some of the most essential of essential workers when we think about foodstuffs and childcare. And DAF dollars were used by private donors and foundations, gave money to a DAF. We moved it to another DAF at another organization. They did some work to make sure that everything was compliant with the regulatory obligations of a donor advised funds. That second DAF gave a tidy chunk of change to a promotora organization, which is a community health worker organization, a private LLC, stood up and run by undocumented women. And they are the ones who decided who received that money. So for gift cards, for food, paid rent, and there are no records of that because the scrutiny of that would be, sorry, my dog is whining. The scrutiny is not applicable. It wasn't required by law that we have the record of who received those dollars, and that program, by the way, in PS did so well at controlling infection that the state of Washington has received a $5 million grant from CDC to scale that to 13 counties. So the pace of change there, because some donors were willing to say, I give up my power to people for whom this program is designed to serve, actually did a better job on the ground. So when we open up systems of power and control and finance to people who've been outside, I mean, people who've been outside of decision making, we just might stumble onto some magic.
There was a question too, and I think one of those radical ideas that is going to leave us, I think, with more questions as we say goodbye in a few minutes. But the gender lens investing, I know it's kind of a buzzy word, and I would just put it out to members of the panel if there's anything that they want to say about that. It's sort of a new concept for me.
Well, I'll speak to that. My business partners are on the call here, a couple of them, including Darcy. Oh, it looks like Darcy might have, oh no, she's still here. She pioneered gender lens investing through her work with Thrivent and its predecessor. And she's one of the pioneers of that style of investing dating way back. And at Fulcrum, we have embraced it wholeheartedly. We integrate diversity into our selection process, not just gender, but other forms of diversity. And we have a gender-focused strategy that selects securities or stocks of companies with gender leadership. And it's in the leadership side of it rather than improving lives directly. That's a more catalytic, direct, put your dollars toward improving the lives of women and children and fighting gender-based violence. In the public markets, investing in stocks, we are investing in companies that have favorable workforce policies and women in leadership positions. The data is challenging, but it's getting better. And in data on diversity and gender issues. And over time, we think that this alpha, if you call it that, the return premium that accrues to diverse teams will be arbitraged away because everybody will be embracing it. If it's, as we believe, a true driver of results, then our vision is that all firms will have diversity in leadership, and that leads to improving lives. So our approach and our investment strategy does involve that. When we're engaging fund managers, regardless of whether the actual fund itself has an ESG label, we interview the manager themselves as to their gender policies, workforce policies, and diversity, and as well as environmental strategies. And so that we're, like I mentioned, the triple bottom line, we're engaging diverse teams because we think that leads to better investment results.
Thank you. Jennifer, do you have anything that you want to say before we close?
Sorry, had to get off mute. I know we're kind of on top of the hour, and so mostly I'm just appreciative of participation. I'm appreciative of the idea of this. And as you kind of said at the beginning, Mary, all of the panelists could have talked forever, and this is my wheelhouse of financial planning, and I learned so much, and I'm eager to kind of take the mantle of this enthusiasm and carry it forward.
Yay. We hope to do that. There's money on one side of it. There's also the whole structure within organizations that are taking on a more value-based or benefit-based approach, which are, these jobs are showing up, these things are happening. We really hope that all of you, we want to thank you for joining us, but we also really hope that there was just a little kernel or a nice little aha or something, I want to go out and learn a little bit more about that or connect with this individual. I want to ask the question about, could Impact 100 adopt some sort of a DAF portion in order to give us a stronger multi-year giving base? Like, that's just one of those where we're trying to figure out how to do that and not have to go from year to year so that we plan. And I'm like, I'm wondering if there's like something within people's DAFs that we could maybe set that up. So I know there are many more conversations to come, but Cam, I want to thank you, Teresa as well, Jennifer, Michelle, Anna, for keeping us all hosted and in. We've got some contact information for you to reach folks. They are all on LinkedIn. And we just so appreciate you coming out and supporting Impact 100. In addition to, we are still taking members for this year. So if you would like to join us, there is still enrollment and space to go. The other thing that Impact has is we host some impact ships. And so there are opportunities for individuals that may not be able to put the money up front, but they support our group and they want to be giving up their ideas and their time. And so we do have, how many of those available, Anna, that we'd still love to find folks that would like to be a part of this?
We have quite a few. Last year we had, I believe, 12 impact ships. This year we have a budget for over 20. I actually think it's closer to 30. And that's thanks to the generous support of many of our members who give more than $1,000. And we are able to expand the reach of our membership this way and bring people to the table that couldn't make those financial decisions otherwise.
Super. Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day.